Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to discuss two different yogas or planetary combinations. They're called Sushubh and Amala yogas, and they're both kind of yogas that indicate attractiveness of different kinds, which we'll discuss. This talk is from a Vedic astrology perspective, or Jyotish, as it's known as in Sanskrit. So, Vedic astrology is ancient Indian astrology that's more than 5,000 years old. So, let's take a look. A few announcements and orientation, especially if you're new to the channel. So I have a level 1 Vedic astrology course that's coming up in January. That's starting January 14th. It's going to be for 12 weeks. On Wednesdays from 8 to 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, New York time. That's going to be on Zoom. It's a small group, so space is limited, and the deadline to apply is January 7th. No astrology experience is necessary to join the class, however. So if you're interested in that, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com for an application. Also, auto dubbing is available on this channel, and there are several new languages that YouTube has presented. So Dutch, Polish, and Korean, in addition to the other languages listed here. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology in my consults playlist, they can be found there. Wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more. Also, my channel is all about playlists. So like this type of talk on yogas is in my yogas planetary combinations playlist, but there are others. If you'd like to learn, in this talk, I'm going to be talking about a few different famous birth charts. And I've done a lot of analysis of famous people, places, and moments in time on the channel. I have a video titled Birth Chart Archive List 2025 where I list most of the birth charts, famous birth charts I've analyzed on the channel, and the videos you can find them in. Because like this, the title of this talk, for example, I can't include everything in the title. But I'm going to be covering 3 different famous charts in this talk. Some of my latest videos, in case you've missed any: planetary transits or Gochar for November 2025, Bharani Nakshatra lunar mansion, and then the new moon or Amavasya that happened on 20th November 2025. Okay, and if you're new to all this and want to learn Vedic astrology or get more out of talks like this, I've listed some videos at the end of the slide here that I would start with to get a really solid foundation, so you can, get more out of Vedic astrology. It's pretty cool stuff. So, all right, so let's get into it here. So we're talking about Sushubh and Amala yogas today. So what does that even mean so far? Okay, so a yoga is usually a planetary combination or some kind of combination. And what yogas do is they give like what I would consider like meta effects or super effects in a birth chart. Okay, so it's beyond like analyzing the planets and the position of the planets and the houses and all this kind of stuff. Okay. So again, a planet we call graha in Sanskrit. Okay, so Sushubh specifically, if you break that down, Shu or Su is means very, and Shubh means beautiful, lucky, or auspicious. So Sushubh yoga means very beautiful, lucky, or auspicious. Okay. So Amala, so you can break this down into A and Mala. So A means on or not, and Mala is like a kind of like waste or toxin or something like that. So unstained, you could say. You could translate this unstained or not stained, so meaning pure. Okay. So either very beautiful, lucky, auspicious, or pure. So you can see these are pretty desirable yogas somebody might want in their chart. Okay, so how would we identify these yogas? Well, these definitions come from the Phaladeepika, which is an ancient text on Vedic astrology or shastra, specifically from chapter 6, shlokas 8 and 19. So Sushubh yoga is defined as natural benefics. Okay, and if you need a reminder, natural benefics when we talk about yogas, okay, not in the general analysis of a birth chart, but natural benefics in yoga specifically are Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, and Moon. Okay. So when you have one of these or more of these planets in the second house from the lugna, and the lugna is the ascendant first house, rising sign, those are all different names for the same thing. Okay, and ideally without malefic planets. So the malefic planets are not these, not Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, or Moon, but the other ones, which would be like what? Mars, Saturn, Sun, Rahu, Ketu. Okay. So if we look at the chart on the right here, which happens to be the chart of Nicole Kidman, very famous American-Australian actress, just to orient you, so this is a North Indian style chart, and the Lugna, also known as the Ascendant Rising Sign First House, is this top diamond in the middle. Okay, you can see the KE underline, that's KT, that's the south node of the moon, and there's a little 7 in the bottom corner. That 7 indicates the 7th constellation of the zodiac, which means Libra or Tula in Sanskrit. Okay, so Nicole Kidman in Vedic astrology is a Libra rising. Okay, and the K2 there, again, the south node of the moon and the north node of the moon. I've mentioned, if you ever watch my video on the symbolism of the nodes of the moon, I've often said that when you have Rahu or K2 related to the Lugna, you can often get somebody who's like an actress or model, somebody who's like basically changing their appearance or a little bit of a hidden appearance or costumed appearance, because Rahu and K2 indicate things that are hidden, unexpected, unusual, that sort of thing. Okay, so that's what we've got going on in her chart. Okay, so ideally without malefics here. So let me just see. Okay, so it happens to be the reason why I chose her chart to start off with is that she has both of these yogas. She has Sushubh yoga and Amala yoga. I'll get into, let's just talk about the Sushubh yoga first. So we want the second house. So again, we start at the Lugna, again, the first house right at the top, the diamond in the middle with K2 in the 7th constellation of Libra. And to get to the second house, you count inclusively from the Lugna. So 1, 2. So K2, and then you go up to the left, that upside down triangle with the moon and with the little 8 in the bottom corner, the 8 referring to the 8th constellation of the zodiac of Scorpio or Vrishika. So she's got K2 in the first house and moon in the second house. And moon, again, is a natural benefic when we talk about yogas. In general analysis, the moon is sometimes benefic and sometimes malefic, depending on how strong it is. Okay. So anyway, for her, she actually has an exaggerated moon because moon is in its debilitation sign, but you can see it's reaching, it's, just a little bit away from being completely full because full moon is exactly opposite from the sun. So you can see as the moon starts traveling forward, it's going to be exactly opposite to the sun. So she's got strength to the moon, but also weakness to the moon. So again, an exaggerated moon here. Nonetheless, because she has moon in the second house, which is the definition of Sushubh yoga here, and she doesn't have any malefics. None of these malefics in here, like K2 Rahu, they don't aspect the second house. Saturn from the 6th house is not aspecting the second Mars. So she's got moon here in the second house by itself. Okay, so that gives her a Sushubh yoga, which I will talk about what that gives on the next slide. But just so you can see in her chart, she clearly has a Sushubh yoga because she has one of these natural benefics, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, Moon in the second house. Okay, now she also happens to have an Amala yoga as well. So she has the very beautiful, lucky, auspicious one, okay, which again, the second house relates to various things, including the voice and the kind of from the neck up, the head and the neck, face, neck, all that kind of stuff. And she's somebody who is an actress, so she's known for her voice and her appearance, especially her face, okay? So, let's see, then the Amala, what about the Amala yoga, okay? Amala yoga is defined as a natural benefic, again, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, or Moon, in the 10th house from the Lugna or the Moon, okay? So she has an Amala yoga from the Lugna, not the Moon, okay? Because you can see she actually has 2 benefics, Jupiter and Venus, in the 10th house, which relates to 9 to 5 activity like work and reputation as well. The other thing is that while moon is exaggerated because it's almost full, which gives it strength, but it's in its debilitation sign, Jupiter is in its exaltation sign. Okay, and Venus is there, so this is going to be a super boosted 10th house here, Amala yoga. Okay, and ideally without malefics. Well, there's no malefics on Jupiter and Venus either. So she has both of these yogas. Okay, so just to get into her story a little bit, like what would we be looking for? Okay, so because the second house relates to early childhood and family assets, that sort of thing, like when I looked up her Wikipedia page, I looked up her early childhood. Okay, so apparently her mom was a nurse and her father was a psychologist. Okay, which makes sense with this exaggerated moon. Okay, because moon represents the public. Okay, and it's in Scorpio, which represents transformation. So she's got mom, a nurse, and I don't know what kind of nurse she was, but they're involved with, physical and mental transformation. Her father was a psychologist. I mean, definitely like mental, emotional is transformation here. And the moon also represents the public, and the second house is the house of gains. So she's somebody who definitely benefits from the public. Okay. And moon, for those of you who are into like the nakshatras and stuff, moon happens to be in the nakshatra lunar mansion of Jesta, which represents protection. So this is protection of the public, protection of the mind, that sort of thing. Which again, her mom is a nurse, her parents are both in healthcare. She was exposed to that in early childhood, and so probably just having a very emotional, and public facing, public protective, being, exposed to those professions, where you're involved in the public and protecting the public and sort of thing. That was her second house, okay, experience as a child. Then her 10th house here. So I'm looking at here, we've got Jupiter, which is exalted. Jupiter represents children, and Venus is here, which represents women, okay? And Moon also represents like women as well. So she's got very strong, for both of these yogas here, Shubh Yoga and Amala Yoga, she's got very strong interest, I would say, potentially in children and women, and probably doing charity work. So on her Wikipedia page, I looked up her philanthropy work, and guess what popped up? Well, causes she's involved with. She's, I think, an ambassador for UNICEF, which is a global child nonprofit, organization, advocating for children's rights and, that sort of thing, okay? Then also breast cancer, which tends to be a female-dominated disease, and also domestic violence. I think primarily of women, but also, that involves children as well. So I'm not too surprised, based on her chart, that these are the causes specifically that she champions. Because again, this Amala Yoga in the 10th house, this is going to be, especially for her, a very charitable person towards women and children. Okay, so let's move on and see. And I've started sort of giving some of this away, but we've got more here. So, oh, and this is her. So just, I would think she's pretty world famous at this point. You probably know what she looks like, but that's exactly the point. Is that she has a very strong second house, so she's going to be famous for her face and voice, which is what she does. And the other thing is those two things are tied together. Actually, her second house and 10th house are tied together because in the 10th house is ruled by Cancer. The constellation of Cancer, or Karka in Sanskrit, and Cancer is ruled by the moon. And again, her moon has gone to her second house. So she is an advocate. She speaks for, she's a face for. That's why she's like an ambassador for this UNICEF organization and these other things. She's a spokesperson and, advocate for, again, issues related to women's and children's charities. So, yeah, that's all there in her chart. Okay, so what do these yogas give? So on this slide, I'm going to specifically talk more about Shubh Yoga. And then on the next slide, and I got a famous chart here, and then on the next slide, I'm going to talk more specifically about Amala Yoga, okay? But here, okay, so again, to really get the most, because again, I have listed here the shastra or sacred texts, okay? So the results I've listed for the most part here are from the Phaladeepika, chapter 6, shloka 13, and also Brihad Parashara Hora, chapter 38, shlokas 1 and 2, okay? But to again get the most out of these yogas, if you really, really understand the symbolism of these planets and the symbolism of the houses, you'll be able to figure out without memorizing. I mean, it's nice to memorize and have some idea of what these yogas give. But like what I did with Nicole Kidman's chart, I was like, before I even, wrote down specifically all the words that's listed in the shastra here, I was like, she's got to be doing some charity work with women and children. So just because, that's what the planets symbolize and the houses symbolize and that sort of thing. Yeah. So again, I have videos on second house and 10th house symbolism and also the natural benefic planets. So I would check those out if you're not familiar. Okay. So again, we've got the results here from two different shastra now. So the Shubh Yoga, I already mentioned the definition, so you know how to identify it in a chart, but let's look at what these texts specifically say. Well, for Shubh Yoga, it's actually very vague. It wasn't really delineated that much. It was discussed with and in between Shubh Solar and Kartra yogas, which I have videos on, so you can check those out. Excuse me, but and these are all discussed primarily as being positive, which we already know, okay, which is not very specific, okay. In my personal notes from when I learned about these yogas, Shubh Yoga will give somebody who's learned, wealthy, eloquent, and family, and then well-mannered and auspicious. So these last two words, well-mannered and auspicious, come from the Brihat Parashara Hora. So again, if we put together natural benefics in the second house, what does the second house indicate? Well, it indicates learning in childhood. It indicates assets. It indicates speech. It indicates family inner circle. So again, if there are, benefics in the second house, then that means during childhood there was a lot of positive energy. Okay, and also the family in general had positive energy and karma, we would say. Okay. So part of it is, this person had the karma to be born into a pretty nice family. And the other members of the family did so as well, most likely. Okay. And if your childhood is pretty nice and you get to go to school and stay in school and your parents are stable and you live in a decent neighborhood, well, you tend to be well mannered because you kind of, again, there's nature and nurture, right? It's like when you're growing up surrounded by pretty supportive people, neighbors and aunts and uncles and parents and siblings and all that kind of stuff, it shapes you in positive, beneficial ways. Like, again, her parents, one's a nurse, one's a psychologist. So she was probably like, innate in her is the drive to help, in public ways, help the public, help whatever, help people out. Okay. So, but again, this is also, there's a few words here, but again, this is pretty vague. I mean, when we look at Amala, yoga, you'll see it's much more specific. But like, again, just knowing, what I know about planets and houses, this is how I would even break these words down a little bit more. So learn it, specifically education, that was something that was learned in childhood. Okay, even before like you get to, grade school or something like that, primary school. Because you're learning, but like learning through your environment, learning from the people around you, learning from your home and your neighbors and your whoever's around, whatever's around. You're picking up some skills here. Okay. Wealthy, well, specifically movable assets, because that's a second house, but other assets such as food. So there was probably food on the table, and clothing is also second house stuff. Okay. And investing. Okay. So people who have benefics in the second house probably, again, especially when there are no malefics here, and also you have to consider the lord of the second house here. As long as the second house lord is not challenged, then they probably had food to eat and clothing to wear. Okay. So again, they didn't have to probably stress and strain too much. Okay. So then eloquence, well, oral communication is second house stuff, but speech, so literally the words that they say, but also their voice. So like the quality of their voice, the tone of their voice, if people have really amazing second houses, which we'll talk about, they can be things like singers and lecturers and orators and that sort of thing. Okay. Then again, the second house represents family and inner circle, people who, even if they're not biologically or married in as family, people who are close enough that you consider them family, like you're close, And that's the thing is, like they say, you're the five people who are closest to you really influence who you are, especially when you're young, in terms of your thoughts and experiences and mannerisms and all this kind of stuff. Okay. So this is also a pretty nice upbringing for the most part, again. And I would consider this more of a collective karma, type of house. Then beauty, because again, especially for Shubh yoga, we're talking about very, not just beautiful, but very beautiful, and the second house represents the head and the neck, from the neck up, essentially. So when there are benefics here, somebody tends to be fairly physically attractive and or like attractive with their voice and the way they speak or what they talk about, that sort of thing, and possibly even famous for it, like we talked about Nicole Kidman. Okay. The other thing about the second house is the second house is considered a house of gains. So you can also consider like the natural benefic that's in the second house is the owner of which house. Okay, and as I mentioned, for Nicole Kidman, her second house had the moon in it. The moon is a lord of the 10th house of, 9 to 5 work and reputation. And so her 10th house lord has gone to the second house. So she's going to be gaining from, all the charitable work she does, but also Venus represents the arts and Jupiter represents, publishing and speaking and that sort of thing. And if I want to say, but don't quote me on this, I think Jupiter's um, in the nakshatra of Ashlesha, which is a lunar mansion, which is symbolized by a snake. So there tends to be a lot of like mesmerizing qualities. So that's who she is. Her 9 to 5 work and her reputation is for being a mesmerizing person, for both her face and her voice and her artistry and that sort of thing, and her charitable work as well. Okay. So yeah, you consider that as well. So not just like which, just having a natural benefic, in the second house will give you some of these things. But then if you want to get into the nitty gritty, refined detail of what specifically the second house will give, you have to consider what the planet symbolize, what the house symbolizes, the condition of these things, and yeah, and also the benefic planets that are in the second house, what houses they're the lords of. Okay. So the other thing about this is having a Sushubh yoga. If you have natural benefics in your second house, they always aspect the 8th house. And the 8th house is deep psychology. So what that means is you have all this natural benefic energy for what you say out loud, but all this natural benefic energy aspecting the 8th house of things that you think. So especially when somebody has natural benefics in the second house, they're going to speak well and reflecting the 8th house, think well. So this means that there's going to be positive thoughts and speech, and thus positive karma, so outcomes and results in their life. Okay. So here's another example, another chart. This is Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States. He was born 12th February 1809, Hodgenville, Kentucky, USA. Okay. So look at his second house. He's got this humongous Sushubh yoga in his second house. I mean, this is about as strong as you get. Okay. So he's got Jupiter. So the second house here, this little 12 represents the 12th constellation of Pisces, or Meena in Sanskrit. Jupiter rules Pisces. So Jupiter is in its own house. This is a mega Jupiter here. Okay. So Jupiter represents speech. It represents publication, represents news. It represents balance, fairness. And he is probably one of our most famous presidents of the United States. And he was known for things like the Gettysburg Address, which I actually had to memorize in grade school. I mean, it's like I still remember it, 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth upon our nation oh, no, I forgot it. See, a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. See, I still sort of remember it from like 3rd grade or whatever. So anyway, he was famous for that kind of stuff. But also, he engineered and wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, which essentially ended slavery in the United States, because he was the president during the American Civil War. Okay. So, and then Venus is here as well. Okay. So Jupiter is already super strong because it's in its own sign, but you have Venus here, which is exalted. So he's got a Swa, or, Swa means a Jupiter in its own house, and Venus exalted. This is like about as strong as the second house as you can get. Okay. And the thing is, he was also famous for his look, his face. Like if you see, and on the next slide, I have like a photograph of him. And I looked up, I just intuitively, I never thought about something like this, but I was like, I think he was born, because he was president, when was the Civil War, like 1860 or something like that. And I was like, I think that's about the time that photography started coming out, like not everyday photography, but like important people like him might have gotten photographed. So I just like Googled, I was like, what was the most famous US president photograph ever? And he was at the top of the list. Okay. So again, not too surprising when you have this Venus Jupiter, you know, in his second house like this. He's going to be famous for his look. And he was. And he, isn't maybe so, refined and polished and beautiful, as Nicole Kidman, but he had a very striking look. And in fact, he had, I believe, a connective tissue disorder called Marfan syndrome or something like it, where he has a very particular look. He's very tall, very lanky. And Marfan syndrome people, they tend to have very long limbs, like arms and legs, and square hips. Um, Anyway, so he's very like distinct, and nobody really quite looks like him. He stands out that way. But yeah, but this massive Jupiter um, and Venus are aspecting his eighth house of deep psychology. So he's going to be thinking all these like really benefic thoughts, which is going to drive his benefic, speech giving and speech giving that's going to draw a divided nation together, and also like bring in disenfranchised people of society, like slavery and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, so this is his chart. So he's got a very, very strong Shushubh yoga here. Okay, so this is Abraham Lincoln, and again, what is considered to be the most famous photograph of any U.S. president ever. This was taken by Matthew Brady or his studio in Washington, D.C. So here you go. That's his second house showing up right there. Okay, so now let's talk about Amala Yoga, the other one, because again, they're similar, like, but again, they give different types of benefits and attractiveness. Again, the second house is all about face and speech and being a public, visually public, person and that sort of thing. So it took me a lot longer to find somebody with the Amala Yoga. I was trying to look for somebody who had an Amala Yoga who didn't have a Shishub Yoga, because I would think with an Amala Yoga and no Shishub Yoga, that means somebody who's doing really great things, but maybe not so publicly recognized, like not somebody whose photography recognized or voice or works or whatever you recognize, like somebody who might be a little bit behind the scenes a little bit, um, who's doing really great things. Okay. So I did find this chart in my database. This is Ralph Waldo Emerson. He's a philosopher. But let's talk about, and so just if you think about it, Ralph Waldo Emerson, before I even get into his chart or the more about Amelie, does anybody know what he looks like or what he sounds like? I didn't. I know his name and I know he's important, like in philosophy, but I have no idea what this guy looks like. So he does not have, a Shishub Yoga, although he kind of does um, in spirit. And the reason why he has one in spirit is you can see his second house here is empty. He's got the 7 in the bottom corner here that represents Libra, and it's empty here. But he's got Venus aspecting Libra, and Venus owns, Libra. So actually, it's almost like he has Venus indirectly in the second house, which is very strong. The other thing is he has Saturn aspecting the third house, and Saturn is exalted in Libra. So actually, his second house is very strong. So even though he's got no planets in the second house, he sort of has a Shub Yoga because Venus is there. The only thing is what brings us down is a Saturn, because Saturn's a natural malefic. So it's a little bit Shishub-like, and he was a lecturer. He lectured around the world, like Europe and the United States. So his second house is very strong, but I don't think that's the main reason why he was, important in history. Okay. Well, let's talk about Amala Yoga, because he definitely has one of those. You can see he's got Mercury in the 10th house in its own sign. So he has this massive Mercury here. Okay, so again, the definition of Amala Yoga is a natural benefic in the 10th house from the Lugna or the moon. And he doesn't have it from the moon, but he has it from the Lugna. So he definitely has an Amala Yoga. And what does it give? On or not, Mala, toxic, stained, so unstained. So this guy was all about, purity. of mind, because again, we're talking about Mercury, which is ideas, thoughts, in its own sign, which is an air sign. So this is why this guy was a speaker, thinker, philosopher guy. But we do get from the Phaladeepika and Brihadarashara, those two shastra, ancient texts on Vedic astrology, much more detail than on Sushubh Yoga. Sushubh Yoga, again, was very vague. But here you get words like virtuous, faith in religion, happy, fortunate, honored by the king, amiable, always smiling, possesses lands, children, famous, prosperous, wise, fame, long-lived, somebody who's like famous throughout history, even beyond their death, that kind of thing, and enduring, abundant pleasures, charitable, dear to relatives, helpful to others, pious. So again, this is a different kind of attractiveness than second house Shishib Yoga. Okay. This is more like somebody could have a second house where they're famous because they're so good looking or beautiful, or they got, a silver tongue. There's a silver tongue devil sometimes or whatever. But with the 10th house here, this is somebody whose day-to-day work, day-to-day actions are what create the attractiveness, for them and what they do. Okay. So he was all about, like, he created, oh, see, I have here. Okay. So he had, what did he write? He wrote and lectured about individuality, freedom, and linking art and literature with nature. Okay, so nature inspired, like purity of nature inspiring art and literature here. I mean, that's all like this Mercury, purest Mercury. And actually, Mercury is, I believe, in Mrigashirsha nakshatra, which is symbolized by a deer running through the forest, walking through the forest. So again, he's literally talking. I mean, that's very almost like, very literal for him. Like he's talking about how the forest should inform our art and thoughts and, ideology and stuff like that. He also, at some point in his life, and I don't know how he came across them, but he studied the Vedas. So he actually studied like ancient Indian astrology philosophy as well. And he created philosophers boot camp. So I guess he took a bunch of his fellow philosophers up to the, North New York Adirondack, mountains or whatever, and they camped out and talked about whatever they talked about. And he was an abolitionist as well, so he was also like anti-slavery. And essentially his whole vibe, his whole like brand, if you want to use those modern day words for him, was that he was an idea purist. So that's very much in line with this Amala yoga type of, idea. Okay. So, and the 10th house again is about daily work and reputation. So, what do you do on a day to day? So, if the second house is about speaking and it, and the natural benefics there, if there are natural benefics, are aspecting the 10th house of, thoughts. So, if you're building good karma through your speech and your thoughts, this is about building good karma through your actions. Okay. Because the 10th house, again, whatever you're doing in the day to day, you're building something, you're building the future. Okay. But the other thing is the Mercury here, or any natural benefics that are in the 10th house are going to be aspecting the 4th house of the past. So lineage, family, mother. So again, even though the benefics are in the 10th house of day-to-day work and reputation, there's still some benefic energy aspecting, family lineage, especially mom. Okay, so there's still some notion here of collective karma informing, underpinning or related to this Amala yoga. Okay, so if you have a really negatively placed, conditioned 4th house, that means that there are no benefics in there, and there are probably natural malefics in there, natural malefics aspecting in there. Then, you may still do good work, but the past is, probably not so happy and fortunate the way we're looking at things here. Okay. Some of the stuff that's in this list, like possesses lands, that has nothing to do with the 10th house. That's the 4th house. So if you have natural benefics aspecting the 4th house, then you're more likely to own land or a house or something like that, property, immovable assets. Okay. The other thing is all this like happy, fortunate, smiling stuff. That's also the 4th house. The 4th house relates to happiness. So if you have natural benefics, in the 4th house, then that helps that. Okay. So, yeah, I think I talked about everything. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for that. And here's a picture of this man who I had no idea what he looked like. And again, not as striking as Abraham Lincoln. I think he probably looked a lot more like many other folks, but Abraham Lincoln, I think, pretty much stood out. Again, maybe just because of his medical pathology, frankly, but still, he's even today. People may not even know what he was involved with as a president, even though he's involved with some major stuff. But probably if they see a picture, they'll know who he is, right? Waldo Emerson, maybe not so much. Okay, so as always, thanks so much for stopping by, listening to one of my talks. I appreciate all your support for my work in the channel and all the ways you guys do that, liking, subscribing, and sharing, and sending in donations and chit-chatting with me in the comments and stuff. So, thank you for all of that. Again, all my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic Astrology are my concept playlist. They can be found there. For more famous charts, you can check out my birth chart archive list 2025 video, where I list almost all the videos famous birth charts I've analyzed on the channel, and the videos you can find them in. But again, I update that video, where I have been updating that video in April. So I guess, the last few months, so will not be included in the video, but come spring of 2026, there will probably be an updated archive list video. If you're interested, again, in personal birth chart readings, I offer those. And then, or if you're interested in my astrology classes, especially this class I'm putting together for January 2026, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com for more info on those things. And then I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine, where I talk about Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, and yoga, so other Vedic arts, as well as other paradigms of medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. And then the name of that channel is Nature Source Care, so that's out there too for you. So as always, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right, so until the next one, take good care. Namaste.